So today we are going to be presenting on the first gen experience. We are both first generation, and we got together a lot and started speaking about that there's a certain community with first generation. So opposed to just focusing on the Latino family, so we're realizing that first generation, there was a unique community and population. And so we really wanted to dive into that and give exposure of what it is like to grow up as a first generation. In case you have first generation clients or you just were curious about how that experience is. Of course, there's different factors. So while we both are first generation, we have different stories. So I'm the eldest, Martha's the youngest.
Yeah.
And we'll get into more about that throughout the presentation.
So part of what you're going to learn, you're going to gain a little deeper understanding, as Jessica was saying, of the first generation individuals and their families. So most of the time we talk about the immigrant story, we focus on the immigrant that came here, but we want to switch over the lens and highlight the children. You're going to identify different factors that can impact the first generation story, so it's not all the same. Raise cultural awareness of the immigrant household, recognize the multiple cultures that exist within one family, and acknowledge and highlight the multi-generational differences and outlooks. You're going to hear a lot of different voices in the therapy room, so we want to make sure we introduce that. So what is a first gen? Well, it's first generation after your immigrant parents arrived. They can either be naturalized citizens, or we're also including dreamers. We're including people that have been raised here. It's the dreamers that come, and then also the ones that are born to immigrant parents. The first gen story is not all encompassing. So we are very different, even in our conversations. We'll kind of challenge each other, like, no, that didn't happen for me. And she's like, yeah, no, that happened for me. So it's gonna, it varies, right? There's different factors that are gonna influence it. A little bit of facts and stats. I'm gonna go through this part pretty easily. Most of the first gens, the majority of them are going to be Hispanic in the U.S. It holds the biggest demographic. And as Hispanics, we're a collectivist culture. In the same household, especially, you're going to be seeing a lot of the clients. You're going to have different generations. So even like grandparents are going to be in there. So grandparents, mothers, children, and it's going to continue on in the household. So to kind of give you the significance of why talking about immigrant stories is important is because 13.8% of them are foreign-born. And what I found really interesting as I was doing some of this background study, for the past 2 decades, the births of children to immigrants was actually increasing. It was higher than immigrants coming in. So it's like, oh, okay, that's going to be a huge demographic for us. Of course, like the past couple of years, that inverted again, but we have a lot of first gens that are being born in the country. And then the other thing is that maybe you think we all speak Spanish, and we don't. A lot of people, even dreamers, sometimes they don't speak Spanish at all, right? So there's the English proficiency has increased within our parents and the immigrants, but also the children aren't speaking as much Spanish. So language is not really a factor.
So what are the factors that can impact a first generation story? So there are quite a few, and then we grasp them from our personal experience as well as our clients. So these are the factors that can really contribute to the story and change it. So first, the parents' immigrant immigration story. The context matters. Was it an easy immigration story? Was it very dangerous? Did it happen 10 years ago? Did it happen 2 weeks ago? And so those are all factors that can really contribute to the complexity of the immigration story. How well adapted are they to America? How are they still struggling because they're so new?
I'm getting feedback, so I'm trying to back up.
Okay. And then the immigration status. So are they documented? Do they have some sort of papers? Are they still immigrants? That can cause a lot of stress to the children. I have countless of clients that talk to me about how stressed they are that their parents might not be here anymore, or that they're going to be sent away, and that really is stressful and causes so much anxiety. So that is something to consider. Generational trauma. That is something that comes out a lot in conversation. Our immigrant parents didn't have the easiest life. They probably started working at 8 years old, probably grew up poor. Maybe there was violence, abuse, so many different things because they were surviving in another country. And so sometimes, when people don't realize that those things are not normal, they're not okay, they don't change, and then it repeats through generations, and then we see that generational trauma. And so a big factor is how much is the family system working on that, and how much are they changing, and then how is that impacting the individual.
And I think, if I can interrupt, the factors is maybe some of them don't have that at all.
Yeah.
Right, so it's all a spectrum. Some families are going to come in pretty easily and not have any trauma with them. It's just going to be a little bit of challenge or adversity. And then you have clients that, like Jess was talking about, it's full of trauma. So all of these factors are going to kind of play into the story of our presentation.
Which that brought up another point in my mind of, then there's it wasn't that bad trauma, and so they minimize a lot that things are still not okay, and then that's another layer of work through, because they'll say, well, I didn't see any domestic abuse, I didn't see any substance abuse, so it's really not that bad, and so that's another layer.
Yeah.
Parents' emotional intelligence. And so when you're surviving, you don't really care about emotions. You don't think they matter. There's no time for emotions because you're too busy surviving and making ends meet. So that impacts the emotional intelligence.
And is it you?
I think so. Maybe I'm moving too much. So yes, emotional intelligence is a big factor. So how well in tune is a parent? How much are they validating the kids' emotions? How much are they emotionally present to them to make them feel heard, seen, like they're important, and that they matter. Socioeconomic status, that's also a huge one, that creates a lot of opportunities, that also makes people miss out on a lot of things. And that is definitely a factor, and especially as we'll talk later on, as we kind of go social mobility, it really impacts you because then it does impact your identity of I'm in this bracket, I don't think I belong here. So it really does impact the story. The level of English proficiency. How much or how well do parents know English? And that will impact the child, because if they don't know English very well, that means the kid does more. The kid is more responsible now. They have to do a lot for the parents versus a parent that is well versed in English. They can do their own thing, they can apply, they could speak to people without being translators. The level of education education, I think that also matters. So not all, but a lot of immigrant parents, they didn't have the privilege of education. And so that impacts conversations, that impacts level of how well do you relate to your child that, you know, is going to school.
They understand the education.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And then sibling order, we see this a lot. And so through our work and our research and this presentation, like apparently there's an eldest daughter syndrome. And I'm the eldest daughter, so I could relate to a lot of that stuff.
And I think that's where we were challenging each other in the conversation. I was like, I didn't deal with that. She's like, don't we all? I'm like, nope, I'm the youngest. I guess I'll call my sister and see.
Exactly. So sibling order does matter. Are you the eldest, middle, youngest?
Are you a boy or are you a girl?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, are you the responsible one? Or, you know, and so sometimes that is gender-based, unfortunately. And a big one, feminismo. And so that is huge. Feminismo, we're such a collectivist culture, so we don't do anything by ourselves. We have to do everything as a family. And if you don't, it's a threat to feminismo, it's an insult to feminismo, and it almost kind of gives this impression of, well, why? Why not? Why not do everything as a family? And so down the presentation, we'll talk a little bit about how that does create some clash with family as the child gets older.
I'm curious, do any of you work with first gens? You do? What do you guys, any thoughts on the list of factors? Any experiences that you guys want to share? Maybe you are a first gen. Okay, we'll wake up a little bit and then we'll come back to that. Oh yeah, sorry.
I mean, I've just got a brief one, but like
Yeah.
the pressure that kind of the responsible one can have
Yeah.
can be a lot. And if we're talking about emotional intelligence, like they can be inadvertently or purposefully taught to just like cram it all in,
Yeah.
and they're still in survival mode years after they
The first gen?
yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So we really want to guide you through the gen story. We want to tell you the story, the narrative of a first gen individual. So to start, we are a product of immigrants. It is a survival story, even for us. We kind of have to survive with them. They're learning, we're learning together. It is an environment where adults are learning to adjust to a different country, and that's not an experience everyone has. And I think that's what it makes it so unique for first gens. Everything is new. The language, the government, the school system, the customs, the traditions. So everything is new. Like, we didn't really celebrate Thanksgiving until I started getting older, and I said, well, why don't we celebrate Thanksgiving? You know, we're in America. So it's just, everything is really new to us. The American dream. So, yes, other people have the American dream, not just first generation. But the thing with the American dream with us is that our parents' sacrifice has to be worth it.
There's seats over here.
They're immigrants, and they sacrificed a lot, and they gave up a lot to come to America for better opportunities. And so the kid is the product of that, and so there's this expectation of like, oh, we have to make the story worth it for them because they went through a lot and they struggled a lot to get the family here. And belonging and finding your place. Balancing 2+ cultures, and then the social mobility that the first gen can experience of going through maybe higher education or a career or a trade, and their world becomes very different from their parents' world, and that also could create some clashes and some differences as the first gen just kind of moves around like their own world that has never been experienced before in the family system. Alejandra Campoverdi has the book on first generation, and I really liked this quote. We thought that it really but today. So it says, to be the first and only in America is a delicate balance of surviving where you come from while acting like you belong where you're going. So, we don't have a path created, we create the path, and so that's a lot of the journey for us. So we're going to guide you through the story. So we're going to talk about the child, the teenager, young adult, and adult. So we really want to paint a picture of what it's like. We want to be really descriptive and build this narrative. So the things that our first-gen child could experience is that they're figuring it out with the parents along the way. And sometimes realizing, oh, I think I am better equipped than my parents in this situation. Kind of like Carlos was saying, he had to do the phone calls. I had to do the phone calls too. I had to do the applications. I had to enroll my family in medical insurance at elementary school age. I didn't know what I was doing, but I had to figure it out. Another part is you possibly navigate English as your second or third language. English was my second language. And that's tough. That could create maybe feeling not equipped. That was definitely my case. So I don't even remember how I learned English. I just know it. And when I started taking English classes, actually getting grades for them, that was really tough because I didn't really know how to spell English, the language, and so I had a really tough time adjusting. I knew how to speak it, but it was an adjustment being a student, in the English language, and so that really, I think, impacted a lot of my identity at such an early age. Then, as mentioned, a first-gen child commonly fills paperwork. Paperwork that they probably shouldn't be filling out because it is the adult responsibility. But, it needs to happen. It is for the family. It's for the greater good. And it is because one of the factors, if the parent doesn't really know English, they simply cannot. And so it does create a child being better equipped. And at this age, you start noticing the difference, kind of like you were talking about, how people get treated differently in schools. And so you really start seeing, I am feeling, I am different. Not everyone is bilingual. Not everyone's parents are from another country. Not everyone has the same traditions. Maybe not everyone gets labeled not smart because of the language or where their parents are from. And at such a young age, you start really seeing these differences. This narrative starts already building of, I'm different.
Yeah, I know. Why don't we get peanut butter and jelly sandwiches?
So we wanted to highlight parentification. It starts at elementary school age for a lot, and it kind of leads to teenager and so forth. This is something that a lot of our first-gen clients talk about. So it is really important to highlight because it impacts an individual in different ways. Maybe they become hyper-independent, maybe they can't trust for anyone to kind of take care of them, or it has to land on them. It can be heavy. So the official definition is the process of role reversal where a child or adolescent is obliged to support the family system in ways that are developmentally inappropriate and overly burdensome. So what we see in parentification is the child has responsibilities of an adult, where the adult is not able or capable. The family hierarchy becomes inverted, and so as a family therapist, that's really interesting to see in session, because then because it's parents and child, but when they become equal, it can create a lot of conflict and a lot of, well, you can't tell me what to do, and then when parent tries to be parent, there's power dynamics even at play, and so it's really interesting to see it in family sessions. So noticeable impacts throughout life, and then we'll talk more about that as we go on. But what this can do is it robs children of childhoods. It doesn't really allow a child to be a child, and that I think every child deserves to be a child. This doesn't happen only to Christians, but it is a big part of, can be a big part of our story.
It even shows up like not just administratively or with becoming like a representative. It's also right now they said it robs them of childhood. I'm thinking of the cleanliness of the house, like the upkeep.
Yeah.
You know, like the babysitting your siblings, or like you have to have the house ready and dinner ready before mom gets home from work.
Yeah.
And it's not even like, oh, you're getting chores and getting paid for it. No, this is
Like you need to do this.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that's part of parentification, I think. What our conversation was like is that you would say, like, my parents said, what else do you have to do? You're just a student, right?
Mm-hmm. That's your only job.
Yeah,
Or
and-
you're good at this only job.
If we look at this story, there are themes and there are factors that are the foundation and that are tying every Christian's experience like that, right? It's kind of like your parents will not understand the American culture and the American systems, period. But the depth of adversity that you're going to experience depends on Liliana's privilege, the level of education, what you were back in the country of origin. Or, like for me, I'm at the other end of the spectrum. I'm like, all of the trauma that you can think of, throw it in there. You know, it's just like, I come from abuse and low IQs and low EIs, and so I kind of brought in the other side. I'm like, yeah, that for sure happened, and my parents were maybe just how to survive, like that was probably their primary role, and then otherwise like the functioning and the success and the survival was my sister. Yeah, so it's definitely like a range.
Yeah. So to continue talking about the range of parentification, because it's not just, so the most popular form is the kids have to take care of those siblings, right? And so that is the most popular one, that's the one a lot of people talk about, but it's not the only one, it shows up in different ways too. So like I mentioned, just taking care of the important, applications and paperwork, knowing your family's financial status, and managing money for parents. And so a child doesn't need to be doing that. But sometimes when you're surviving or when you grow up in a like a low as socioeconomic status, it's almost like a need, like let me teach you to not be like us, so let me just tell you the whole situation. And so it can be good intentions, but really not appropriate, not age appropriate. And so depending on the child to maintain a household. And so we wanted to be careful with this because it's not having chores, it's not teaching responsibilities, it's not like clean your room or hey, wash the dishes, throw out the trash.
I know my daughter's sitting here, I'm like, don't think that
you're not on chores, so sorry. But it's more of the dependency. Like I depend on you, child, to help me take care of this home. And so that is a big responsibility and burden. Taking care or regulating parents' emotions. So back to that emotional intelligence. Are you calming your parent down, right? Are you de-escalating fights between parents? So I have so many stories of my clients telling me, yeah, I was my parents' therapist. I sat them down, I told them how they were wrong, and I de-escalated a lot of fights. That's just not okay. That is an example of parentification. Being involved in adult problems and maybe adults. So another version is just knowing adult things, like adult problems, so maybe venting to them, seeking your child for that, just get that emotional, like becoming their friend, right? Like, oh, your dad did this or your mom did this. Can you believe your tia, did this to me and now we're not talking? And so they just kind of don't need to know adult problems, and that is a version of parentification. So the first gen teenager, so I work with teenagers a lot, and they're so resilient. They kind of, this is such a weird but interesting stage to the first gen experience. So here, the differences between their friends becomes a little bit more visible. It's like, well, why don't you have to do this? Or like, why don't you have to fill this up? And it's like, what? And then I think there's also like culture shocks with your friends. So I'm thinking of this one client, Hispanic, and then his friends' parents are white. Very different parenting. And it's like, well, why do they get to do this? And then it's real weird. It's just like, oh, well, you're come from a Hispanic family, and then the tradition is different. The rules are different. And then, but it's very frustrating for the teen. I'm really understanding that. The American side starts getting explored more for the teenager here. And it starts adding depth to the first gen story. So now you realize, oh, like I'm American and I'm also, from the country that, my parents are from. And that becomes a little bit more visible as a teenager because you start kind of exploring things. I remember it was such a culture shock for my mom when I started listening to rap. I started listening to English music, and she was like, what is going on? Like, why are you listening to this music now? You used to only listen to Spanish. It was a big deal for her. But that was just me exploring the American side of me, and more, hip and like what my friends were listening to and what they were kind of liking and enjoying at that time. And so here, also, it starts pretty young. You start living your parents' immigration story. So maybe you start hearing, you kind of know what it means to be the kid of an immigrant. You realize that you're getting older, and so you're connecting more dots. I was like, oh, my parents did this to be here. I wasn't here just because, just to be here. Like, they deliberately, moved from their country to be here. And then sometimes, it does get thrown in their faces. Well, we didn't come here for nothing, like, well, where I was from, or because we did this, you need to do this. And so the story gets kind of brought up a lot more in here. And then the pressure starts to kick in of being successful. It's like, well, damn, like, my friend, doesn't have to deal with this because their parents were born here, so they're not constantly told, you need to do this because, the first gen story or the American dream.
With this one, this is one of the points where my perspective was a little bit different, right? Because I have that spectrum of like parents with low emotional intelligence, they didn't understand that I have to be successful or that I have to work at school. So the inverse of this is like, they really are just not involved. They just, not that they don't care, it's just it's not relevant. Like my dad was selling lines at 8, so he's just like, okay, you're going to school, cool. Like it's more of, I don't want to get arrested for not sending you to school. And even now I'll have a conversation with my dad. I'm like, yeah, but you guys didn't even send me to school. Like if I said I had a stomach ache, he'd be like, okay, stay home. Yeah. So the importance was just not even there. So I had zero pressure.
Which I think leads to the family not really understanding.
Yeah.
Because there's so many spectrums to this, right? Like with Martha's story, like her parents didn't really understand that was probably pretty important, right? Like it was like a big deal. And so that, does impact, the experience and the story. And then we have other spectrums like, like Leanna, like I'm saying, like, what do you mean? Like, it's not that bad. It's not that hard. It does create a disconnection of not really understanding. Then there's a perspective of, not really knowing what school here is like. And so it does create like this disconnection of why are you not just getting hundreds, or, like not really asking about the day. You're like, oh, cool, you won, good job. Or, why isn't it that easy? Or it's not really not that bad. So a lot of minimizing and invalidation starts kind of kicking in here with the school system. And so yes, so lack of validation. Another kind of common way is parents kind of can, not all, but in sessions it does come up a lot. They compare this story. Well, you didn't grow up poor. Well, you didn't have to work at 10 years old. And so there is like a lot of comparison. And so it is common for the immigrant parent to kind of say, well, you have it easy. You didn't have our life. You didn't go through our struggles. What are you complaining for? You don't know how lucky you are. And that, it's really sad to see in family session, because you see the parents almost grief, right? Man, like my kid doesn't know how lucky they are. And it comes from a place of pain, but that just really causes another big disconnection of, both stories could be hard. It's not about who was more painful than the other, but sometimes it does become about that when emotional, intelligence is not really there. And so there are factors that can impact parents' guidance expectations. So here the story becomes really different, because depending how the parents' guidance and expectations are, it does create different narratives for the kid.